getting ready for my presentation. Okay, so my presentation is on George Bernard Shaw and the New Woman. And the term the New Woman was coined during the Victorian fin de siècle time period. I think is how you say it?
Close enough.
Close? Okay, I was close. And basically it was a time period where they pushed for lots of new changes in the arts and science, politics, and society. And one of the biggest changes was the role of women. And the term was fashioned as a response to the limiting roles of being a wife and a mother. And so there were two terms that were kind of coined at the same time. It was the New Woman and the Dandy. The New Woman kind of pushed for the limits that were set by these roles of wife and mother for them, that they shouldn't be as limiting as they were. And so it's basically like the beginning of feminism in England and Europe. And then the dandy is kind of the opposite. It's this idea of the masculine, and it threatened the accepted view of masculinity. So basically it took this, the New Woman took femininity and the dandy took masculinity and kind of showed how they could mix and create this beautiful, like, successful woman and man, and that they could be mixed both ways. And so some of the changes that occurred due to this idea of the New Woman was, so lots of employment opportunities opened for women, so they started educating themselves more and more, and they would go later and later in education, and so they'd get married later in life, and the later they got married and the longer they went single, women got to know themselves more. And so this idea of like their sexuality, women got to know themselves more, so they started to like understand what they wanted in life, and so sexuality started to become a big thing for women as well. There were arguments for and against the New Woman. Some of the arguments for were that many men actually liked the idea of a woman who could take care of herself and go out and work. They found it both sensible and desirable. And then some women believed that they should be allowed the same opportunity as men. And most of these women were in their 20s and 30s, and I think that it was because they had children at that age, and they saw what their children could have with this change in the New Woman, and so that's why they supported it. But many women were actually against the idea of female emancipation because they believed that the status quo of marriage and motherhood would start to be questioned. And a woman who was really against it was Mrs. Humphrey Ward. She wrote, that was her pen name, she wrote under Mrs. Humphrey Ward. And basically, she said that by a woman going out into the world and working or not being home cooking or doing whatever she was supposed to do, that the give and take in marriage would be completely ruined. And, sorry, there was something else. Oh yeah, she was a member of the National Anti-Suffrage League. Like, she literally did not want suffrage for women. I thought that was really funny because when you think about women, like, you're like, every woman wants suffrage, but there was a league of women who did not want suffrage in Britain at the time. And so George Bernard Shaw, some of his early life, he was born in Dublin, Ireland, on July 26, 1856. He was the youngest of 3 siblings. He had 2 older sisters, and his appreciation for art began under his mother's guidance. They went to the National Gallery of Ireland, and there was a collection of both Irish and European arts, and so it was under his mother that he started to find this love for art, and through that his literature. And in 1872, Shaw's mother took his 2 older sisters and moved to London, and he was 16 at the time. And then when he was 20 in 1876, Shaw went to London pursuing his writing career. And when he got there, he started off writing novels, which he completely failed at. Like, people read his stuff and were like, you can't write, like, at all. And so then in 1884, he joined the Fabian Society, which is a middle-class socialist group whose goal was to change England, both in the way that they thought, like intellectually and in the society. And his inspiration for the criticism that's in lots of his work came from his involvement in the society. And I also think it came from the fact that the reason I included his early life is because he had a mother who supported him, and she went away on her own and supported herself. And I really think that shows where a lot of his belief in these women and support for this change came from, and the fact that he was born in this time period. So he began writing plays. His best plays, he wrote plays for 50 years, but his best plays were written in a 20-year span from about 1905 to 1925. Two of those big ones were Pygmalion in 1912 and St. Joan in 1923. In 1925, he earned a Nobel Prize in Literature, and in 1938, Pygmalion was filmed and put on the big screen, and Shaw received an Academy Award for his screenwriting. And then in 1950, Shaw died at the age of 94, and they said he was still writing a play when he died, so like he never stopped writing. And then The New Woman in Candida. So when the play initially came out, many people weren't sure of what Shaw's purpose was, which I guess I found that hard to believe, but I guess in that time period, because there were other things being written, such as The Dollhouse, people didn't understand it. So The Dollhouse was this novel that was written, and basically there's this woman, and she's married and has kids, and at the end of the novel, she leaves her husband and kids and goes off on her own. And so many people related that novel to this play, and so they thought that the play itself was actually anti-feminist, going against what The Dollhouse had done. And Shaw described it as a mystery play because of that. And then 30 years later, after it was released, Shaw discussed his purpose with The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism. And he said, "A slave state is always ruled by those who can get around the masters. The slavery of women means the tyranny of women. No fascinating woman ever wants to emancipate her sex. Her object is to gather power into the hands of man because she knows she can govern him. A cunning and attractive woman disguises her strength as womanly timidity, her unscrupulousness as womanly innocence, her impunities as womanly defenselessness. Simple men are duped by them." And after reading this, after I found this quote, I was like, that is exactly what the play does, obviously. And basically, in this quote, he's saying that women allow men to go out and get their power like they do because women know that they ultimately are the masters of men, even though men don't really see that. And so I pulled some quotes if you guys want to get your books, because I did not write them down. But there are some quotes, and I tried to get one from every act, so there are a couple from different acts. And so in Act 1 on page 178, about 2/3 down, Lexi's speaking, and he says, "Ah, if you women only had the same clue to man's strength that you have to his weakness, Miss Prossy, there would be no woman question." And basically, this goes with Shaw's quote really well, and in the fact that he's saying that if women recognize men's strength as much as they do his weakness, they'd realize how strong they are. But it's really ironic, because if men recognize women's strengths as they try to look at their weaknesses, then they would realize how strong women really are. And it kind of foreshadows the entire plot of the play, because it literally ends with them asking a woman a question, and she literally is like, "You guys don't control me," and they think they've outsmarted her, and like she has to choose, but she's like, "I don't have to," and so she kind of shows women's strength in the end. And then Act 1, page 185. Sorry, I marked it. This is when you first meet Candida, when she walks in, and they're describing her. The first thing they talk about when she comes in is her role as a wife and mother, and this kind of goes back to the entire coining of the term "new woman," because the first thing they talk about is her wife and mother, and in it they say she's well-built, well-nourished, she will double with the charm of youth and motherhood, so she'll look even better when she becomes a mother. And then after that, they kind of start talking about what she looks like and what she acts like and the kind of person she is. And then you start to get to know Candida, and just the fact that they talked about her as a woman or as a mother first, kind of shows that the reason of the coining of the term "new woman." And then on page 212, this is in Act 2, at the very bottom. This also goes well with Shaw's quote. After I think it's 2 or 3 pages of Morel and Candida just bantering back and forth, Candida says, she realizes how stupid he is. And she just starts, at the top of page 213, she just starts explaining to him like a child. And but she also has that wittiness about her that kind of reveals the new woman. So she has like this motherhood side where she's talking to him like a child, but then her wit kind of brings out that new woman where she says, for abandoning him to the bad woman for the sake of my goodness, my purity as you call it. You can just hear the new woman coming out in her. And she kind of shows how you can balance the idea of motherhood and being a woman who is intelligent and strong and can be in the world and a part of the world and be successful. And then page 233, this is the big one. This is in Act 3. This is when Candida is like, you guys want me to choose. This is the part where, this is the part that the first quote that I used foreshadowed. And so Candida says, oh, I am to choose, am I? I suppose it's quite settled that I must belong to one or another. And Morel says, quite, you must choose indefinitely. And Marchbanks explains to Morel, you don't understand. She means that she belongs to herself. And Candida turns to Marchbanks and says, I mean that and a good deal more, Master Eugene. As you will both find presently, and pray, my lords and masters, we have, what have you to offer my choice? I am up for auction, it seems. And she shows her strength here, the strength of women that men don't seem to see because they only want to see their weakness or the limiting roles of mother and wife. And then she kind of shows her wits again as she refers to them as masters and lords. And it's really ironic going with the first quote that I used when Lexi was talking about the strengths and weakness of women. And then the last quote that I used is on page 136, at the very top of the page. Morel says, it's all true, every word. What I am, you have made with the labor of your hands and the love of your heart. And this goes with that status quo that Mrs. Ward went against. Her whole reason against the woman is the fact that marriage, it'll ruin the status quo, but here Shaw's showing that in the status quo of the marriage, it's actually a give and take where if women come up as high as men, there's this give and take where the man will actually get stronger because of the woman who's there, and he kind of shows that in this quote. And I just thought the whole play was really great, and I could definitely see how Shaw supported the new woman and his ideas in it. And I really liked the play. I don't know if you guys did, but I loved it. But now we're gonna play bingo because bingo is so much fun. Oh, there you go. They're not all the same, I promise. I was gonna just put the same one, and then I was like, I can't do that. Okay, so basically, I'm just gonna read like a definition or a summary of what I talked about, and then you guys can just mark it however you want with a pen or a pencil or whatever. And I have candy for 2 people who win, so there's that. Have fun. Okay, so a middle-class socialist group whose goal was to transform England. Okay, a character in the play who was Morel's secretary. A term fashioned as a response to the limiting roles of wife and mother. The woman who opposed the idea of a new woman as it posed a threat to the status quo of the marriage. The play that Shaw described as a mystery play, and it's also the name of the main character. Where Shaw was born. A play that was adapted to the big screen in 1938. Where Shaw moved to pursue his writing career. The man that's falling and fighting for Candida, falling in love with her. clergyman and Candida's husband. The father of Candida. Morel's assistant who idolizes Morel and aims to be just like him.
Bingo.
Do you want M&M's or micronines? I try to get something up here, but that's a little.
M&M's. That's good.
Okay, good job. There's one more. So, the act in which Marchbanks reveals his love for Candida. The place where Shaw and his mother went that created his appreciation for art.
Bingo.
Who was that?
Me.
No, you don't win. You don't get anything.
You can check it.
Yeah. Good job. And then, there's my work session. I can
Okay.
email it to you.
Yes, if you could please do that. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Courtney. You are off the hook. So let me just call something up here quickly.
Yes. I like bingo. That's
All right. So, anybody know what this painting is? Perhaps you're able to read some little bit of the Google tab at the top.
Titan Assumption of the Virgin.
Yes, this is Titian's Assumption of the Virgin.
It's a guy.
Yes, that's okay. This is Titian's Assumption of the Virgin. And this is the painting that is sitting over the Morel's mantelpiece, right, as a gift from Eugene Marchbanks. So what qualities in this picture do you think speak to this particular character? Here we have, the Virgin Mary being lifted up into heaven on a cloud by a group of chubby little angels, while these earthly forms below, maybe they're apostles or something, I don't know, are sort of reaching up towards her, trying to grab her.
Putting a woman on a pedestal.
Is this just a pedestal?
I think it was.
This is angels in a fluffy cloud, man. I mean, this is
We're trying the pinnacle of pedestals.
Certainly is very transparent. How he feels about her.
uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, this is,
It's not subtle.
yeah, and she's not to remain on the pedestal here, that she's to be lifted up bodily into paradise, unsullied by the hands of the sort of earthly grabbers. So, what we have here is very much an idealized portrait of a woman who, does Candida appear to us really as an ideal in the play? Courtney has told you a little bit about sort of the idea of the new woman and what that has to do with material in the play, but it might be a good idea to talk a little bit as well about what the new woman was pushing against, right? What that idea was up against. Have any of you ever heard of an idea? This was very common in Victorian social thought. called The Angel in the House. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Anybody know what this means? Yeah, Luke.
It was like the British version of a proper woman to stay home, to not actually be educated, but widely educated on the subjects. You have the whole conversation.
Yeah, the angel in the house, right? The in the house emphasizes her domestic role, right? She is supposed to keep the household running and provide a warm and safe refuge for her man to come home to, after he has, had a long, hard day of doing whatever British middle-class men did in the 1890s, right? Selling things or trading stocks or, some such business, right? This is another thing that we need to stress. These are very much class-based ideas, right? The idea of the angel in the house and of the new woman are both very much middle-class ideas. Working class women, by and large, didn't have the option not to work, right? Historically, in working class families, everybody worked because you needed as much money as you could get. Some more prosperous working class families would ape middle class manners. And it was a sign of prestige if you made enough money for your wife not to work. But yeah, by and large, in working class families, everybody worked, even frequently the children. In aristocratic families, nobody worked, right? Nobody had to. You made all of your money essentially off of land rents, right? So nobody actually had to work. So we're dealing here specifically with people who are in sort of educated clerical professions who make a decent living. Right? Enough money that at least one half of the couple does not have to work. But they're still, working people, right? They're still people who have jobs. So the woman is responsible for managing the household and caring for the children. Now, by managing the household, this does not mean necessarily doing housework. Most middle-class women would have had maids for that. But keeping the accounts, making sure everything's paid for, doing the shopping, things of that nature. While it was the man's role to go out and earn a living. It's actually very similar to the ancient Greek household, the way that was set up, right? The ancient Greeks had this idea of what was called an oikos, right? Which just translates to household or hearth in Greek. Where, the man was the public face of the family, and he was the one who went out and worked. And the woman was responsible for taking care of the home, right? And the masculine areas of the home were the social areas of the home. The front of the house, the receiving room, that sort of thing. The feminine areas of the home, into which men who were not members of the family could not enter, were, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the hearth, all that sort of thing. Right? Now, the angel in the house is also the name of an execrable poem by a minor poet by the name of Coventry Patmore. It's really about the only thing Coventry Patmore is remembered for, and it's not remembered for being good. It was extremely popular in the mid to late 19th century. The sort of poem that, say your Victorian grandma might have embroidered onto a little, stencil sheet or something, and put up in her house. But it's generally, artistically not regarded as an especially good poem.
So it's like the equivalent of a live, laugh, love poster?
Yeah, it's Victorian live, laugh, love, right? It's right. It's a sort of trite, buyable sentiment, that doesn't really challenge anyone in any given way, right? It's just, something you put up over your mantle, and isn't that lovely? So, this is what the idea of the new woman is kind of pushing up against, right? This idea of the angel in the house. Now, can we say that Candida herself quite meets the criteria for either of these? She's not quite new woman, right? Because in many ways she is content with her domestic arrangement as it is and has no wish to go out and work on her own, though she does show a good deal of independence of mind. She's also not quite angel in the house because, as we see, she does a good deal of the housework herself. And she does have much more independence of mind than would be typical of this particular sort of subset of Victorian middle-class women, right? I think that, your Mrs. Humphrey Wards would be advocating more sort of the angel in the house position. There are others as well who wrote similar sorts of things we might talk about in a moment, if we happen to get to that. But who sees Candida as something like an ideal? If we look at all the characters in the play, which character is the least realistic about who or what Candida is?
Marchbanks.
Why would you say Marchbanks, Sarah?
Because he's like the quintessential romantic character with romantic ideology. He's not realistic at all concerning her role.
Yeah, what is it that makes him think that Morel treats her like a slave?
She has to change the lamps.
Yeah,
Cut the little onions.
I know her delicate fingers might get soiled with the lamp oil, right? Her, she might breathe in some onion fumes and tear up, right? No one wants to imagine his goddess smelling of onions, right? So yes, this is played up for comic effect, right? That Marchbanks, this 18-year-old poet, has fallen in love with this 33-year-old housewife, right? Who, we're told, in that passage that Courtney has already pointed us to, right? We're told, that Candida is attractive, but already in almost a sort of matronly kind of way, right? We're not talking about someone, we're not talking about a virgin being bodily carried up into heaven here, right? We're talking about someone who cuts onions, who changes lamp oil, who already has children, and has been married for a good bit, and comes also from, we'll get to that in a moment, a kind of aggressively bourgeois background. So how seriously do you think we're supposed to take Marchbanks? You're kind of shaking your heads a little bit.
He's so melodramatic. He's comical through and through.
Yeah. So you remember when the first day we talked about the picture Dorian Gray, I showed you that clip from Patience, the poet Bunthorne kind of mincing around the stage and doing all these poses and his giant bow tie and the sort of childlike dress. Well, if we look at the first physical description of Eugene Marchbanks, right, when Marchbanks first enters, right, he is a strange, shy youth of 18, slight, effeminate, with a delicate childish voice and a hunted, tormented expression and shrinking manner that show the painful sensitiveness that very swift and acute apprehensiveness produces in youth before the character has grown to its full strength. Yet everything that his timidity and frailty suggests is contradicted by his face. He is miserably irresolute, does not know where to stand or what to do with his hands and feet, is afraid of Burgess, and would run away into solitude if he dared. But the very intensity with which he feels a perfectly commonplace position shows great nervous force, and his nostrils and mouth show a fiercely petulant willfulness, as to the quality of which his great imaginative eyes and fine brow are reassuring. He is so entirely uncommon as to be almost unearthly. And to prosaic people, there is something noxious in this unearthliness, just as to poetic people there is something angelic in it. His dress is anarchic. He wears an old blue serge jacket, unbuttoned over a woolen lawn tennis shirt, with a silk handkerchief for a cravat, trousers matching the jacket, and brown canvas shoes. In these garments he has apparently lain in the heather and waded through the waters, but there is no evidence of his ever having brushed them. So we get the sense of someone who is, in a certain sense, unworldly, right? in the sort of chaotic lack of care with which he attends to his dress, but also someone who does have a kind of affected demeanor. Right? The fact that he is also described as being rather effeminate delineates him as a specific recognizable 19th century stage type, of which Bunthorne and Patience is another example. Right, so two of the most common characters in 19th century melodrama, and we'll talk a little bit about what melodrama is in a moment if you don't know, are the stage poet and the stage clergyman. These are the basic characteristics of the stage poet. Right? He also has a kind of arcane vocabulary. Right? He's always speaking in images that the other characters don't really understand. Now, in a 19th century domestic melodrama of this sort, the stage clergyman often had similar characteristics. In fact, they were used often interchangeably. And both character types were regarded as being kind of irresistible to women, right? They were objects of feminine desire, feminine attraction. You know, in Patience, for example, Bunthorne has this horde of admiring girls who are always sort of swooning outside of his gate. So the stage poet and the stage clergyman are complementary types. A little bit more on the stage clergyman in a minute, but I guess I should probably backtrack a little bit and tell you what I'm talking about when I talk about melodrama. Have any of you ever heard this term before? Do any of you know what melodrama is?
Drama where a lot of bad things happen.
Just endless horrible things, right? Just piled upon these poor characters, right? Against which they're largely defenseless. That's one sort of branch of melodrama, right? It's tragedy minus the tragedy, right? Or minus any sort of ennobling human concern. It was the most popular form of play in most of Europe in the 19th century. And melodramas were really, really predictable. You can see, actually, the remnants of this type of play in contemporary soap operas. Even in some sort of contemporary films, there's the same sort of basic pattern, right? You've got typically your innocent, pure, and chaste heroine who can't pay the rent, right? I can't pay the rent. Enter your villainous landlord character, you're with a snidely whiplash mustache and the top hat and the black cape. If you cannot pay the rent, then you must sacrifice your virtue to me. And then your young Dudley Do-Right hero steps in with the money. I'll pay the rent. I'm saved. Curses foiled again. That's melodrama. That's what these plays looked like. They're formulaic and they're terrible. Right? Almost uniformly awful. But this form of play was ridiculously popular, in part probably because it is so bloody predictable. And if there's one thing people hate, it's surprises. They don't want art that's going to challenge their preconceived notions in any way, right? So that became immensely financially successful. Yeah, Alexander.
Weren't melodramas also popular because they were so predictable in addition to being able to be consumed?
Well,
they would follow that form,
Mm-hmm.
so you would have lots of different classes of people consuming.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, and that's a big part of what I'm saying. Yeah, it did kind of appeal to a lowest common denominator, and it did so in large, yeah, by being, as I said, extremely predictable. You usually knew what you were getting if you went to go see a melodrama. Now, by the end of the 19th century, there are playwrights who are challenging this melodrama formula, or who are reinterpreting it in new and interesting ways. Courtney mentioned Henrik Ibsen's play A Dollhouse. Right now, A Dollhouse follows the melodrama form. Exactly that melodrama form that how many of you have read it? Any of you familiar with it? A little bit. Okay. Yeah, it follows that melodrama form almost to a T, right? Up until the very end, when Torvald Helmer, the husband, does not step in to save his wife Nora from shame. And she recognizes that she's been living in a fantasy, and this is not the melodrama that she has thought her marriage was. And so they sit down and have a discussion, which ends with Nora leaving the house for good. Now, people rioted when this play premiered. Right? Ibsen received death threats. And the ostensible reason was, that this was, morally corrupt. How dare you depict a woman leaving her husband and children, no matter what he's done. But I've always suspected that the real reason people walked out of that play, and the real reason people got so angry with Ibsen, is because he set them up to expect one thing. He gave them something else, and it made them feel stupid. And Shaw is very much influenced by Ibsen. And particularly in his earlier plays, like Candida, a lot of what he's doing is taking these melodrama plots and these stock characters and reinterpreting them in ways that are designed to challenge, in particular, a middle-class audience. Right, so you've got these people who are really kind of rising in Victorian society. Everything's going their way. And Shaw is trying to hold up a mirror to that society. And he's using these very dramatic tools to do so. Now, Candida relies on machinery of a specific subset of melodrama called domestic comedy. And a domestic comedy usually featured primarily lower or working class characters. Took place in a single room of a home and featured a kind of love triangle plot. Right, you have, yeah, Katie.
Do you think that the reason that it was mistaken for like a non-feminist play was because it was a lower working class characters?
Well, Candida's not quite a domestic comedy. It's just using some of the machinery of domestic comedy, which I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, these characters by and large are not lower class or working class, right? Morell's a clergyman, Marchbanks is the nephew of some duke or other, right? Burgess sounds like his origins are in the working class, but he's one of those guys who has made his way in the world essentially by stepping on other working class people and looking out for himself. The names are all meaningful as well, and we'll get to that in a moment too. That's another melodrama feature, right? Often sort of simple names that refer to some quality of the character. Right, where was it? Love triangle. Yes, so the usual domestic comedy love triangle is, you got the wife at the top, and vying for her affections are a conventionally masculine husband and a more sort of androgynous interloper. Often a stage poet or a stage clergyman. Right? In a domestic comedy, it's usually the stage poet or the stage clergyman that fills this interloper role. Right? Someone who's not worldly, someone who's not conventionally masculine, and tries to kind of talk a lot of moonshine to the wife to convince her to leave, but her husband's good sound common sense convinces her to stay. Now, if we look at Candida and the way this play is set up, how can we already see Shaw is kind of monkeying with this formula?
They're both those melodramatic characters. Both of the two that are fighting for her are the poet and the clergyman.
Yeah. Both of these slots are filled by characters who usually fill the interloper role. And how well does Morel actually fit the stereotype of the stage clergyman? Is he actually unworldly? Is he someone who does not go out and work and get his hands dirty?
Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't do physical labor, right? But we can see, I mean, the first place we see him is in his drawing room with his secretary. It's loaded with papers. He has speaking engagements all over the place, right? His job may not be physically demanding in the conventional sense, but this guy does work hard, right? He does a hell of a lot of work. So much so that he has a very hard time finding time to fit in all of his speaking engagements. Is Morel affected or effeminate? Well, if we look at his physical description, for example, how does he compare with Marchbanks?
He says several times that he's bigger and stronger.
Yeah.
He's mentioned that.
Yeah, in fact, he occasionally grabs Marchbanks by the scruff of the neck and roughs him up, right? So yeah, Morel is a big dude, right? And he's not just renowned for his, commitment to his work, but he also has several sporting trophies, right? So Morel is inverting the stereotype of the stage clergyman, right? This is not someone who is kind of unworldly and aesthetic and spiritual, right? Morel is a big, real physical presence, as opposed to Eugene, who fits to a T the interloper stereotype, right? So that's one way here in which Shaw is playing with this formula. Where else do we see him playing with the formula? What was supposed to happen at the end of one of these domestic comedies? What's supposed to bring the action to a satisfactory close?
The husband convinces her to stay.
Yeah, the husband convinces her to stay with good, sound English common sense. Is it good, sound English common sense that gets the conventionally masculine husband to convince his wife to stay? Is Morel the one who drives off the interloper? Why does Candida stay with him?
Because he needs her.
He's the weak one.
Yeah. She perceives him anyway as the weak one. I think to some extent it's questionable, and I think the play leaves this question open, how weak he really is. but he certainly accepts her definition of him. Right? If we look at it, so right at the end of the play, right? They sit down and have their discussion. This is much the same way an Ibsen play ends, right? And this is not the way a typical domestic comedy would end. It would end with Morel grabbing Marchbanks by the scruff of the neck because, he's a reedy little pipsqueak and hurling him out the door. And then everyone laughs and claps. Haha, look what he did with the weakling, right?
Well, the thing about it though is she perceives him as weak even though he's the bigger guy.
Yeah, physically, Marchbanks is physically Morel is definitely a lot stronger. He's certainly got a more secure position in the world. But why does she regard him as weak?
Is it because he's younger? He's been kind of propped up his whole life
Mhm.
by his family. And just kind
Yeah.
of spoiled and like told that he can aspire to great things, basically.
Yeah. Nothing has ever really gone wrong in Morel's life up to this point, right? He's always had everything he wanted. He's always had support from his family. He's always had enough to eat. He's always been praised. He's always been loved. Right? If you're looking at sort of at the end of the play, right? Now I want you to look at this other boy here, my boy, spoiled from his cradle. We go once a fortnight to see his parents. You should come with us, Eugene, and see the pictures of the hero of that household. James is a baby, the most wonderful of all babies. James holding his first school prize, one at the ripe age of 8. James is the captain of his 11. James in his first frock coat. James under all sorts of glorious circumstances. You know how strong he is, I hope he didn't hurt you. How clever he is, how happy. With deepening gravity. Ask James's mother and his 3 sisters what it cost to save James the trouble of doing anything but be strong and clever and happy. Ask me what it costs to be James's mother and 3 sisters and wife and mother to his children all in one. Ask Prosy and Maria how troublesome the house is even when we have no visitors to help us slice the onions. Ask the tradesmen who want to worry James and spoil his beautiful servants who it is that puts him off. When there's money to give, he gives it. When there's money to refuse, I refuse it. I build a castle of comfort and indulgence and love for him, and stand sentinel always to keep little vulgar cares out. I make him master here, though he does not know it, and could not tell you a moment ago how it came to be so. So the image she builds up of herself, even though she's sort of speaking her mind independently, does this sound more like the new woman or the angel in the house? Pardon?
I feel like it's almost like a seesaw. One is going, she's putting him down. She's making herself seem that much better for tolerating all of this, even though he's kind of unaware.
It's almost like she took the role of the angel of the house, and
Mhm.
that she used that to make herself the new woman. Like she used all of those roles
Yeah.
and expectations. She did all of them and strengthened herself and her family and made herself a new woman.
It's like that awareness that makes her the new woman.
Okay, so go ahead.
Also, she outplays. I mean, to me, she outplays the woman, the angel of the house, in the sense that
Mhm.
it is, like she's making it seem different from what people think that it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
She's not making it seem like, oh, we're being,
Help, help, I'm being repressed.
yes, but actually
Mhm.
controlled.
So she's taking the angel of the house role and using it to demonstrate her strength and the strength that it gives her. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about someone here who has gone off and done anything really unconventional with her life, right? She doesn't seem to have a university education. She manages the house. She does the things that are expected of a Victorian wife and mother. But she does so in a way to increase her own strength in the household, right? To demonstrate that she is the pillar of support on which her husband leans. Now, is Morel completely a fool? Is Morel completely a pompous windbag? You're shaking your head no?
No, because he tells, what's his name? He tells Marchbanks that you don't understand. She means that she belongs to herself. He
Mhm.
knows the role that she plays in the house and how
Mhm.
important it is.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at some of his, so he understands, at least finally at the end, right, the role that his wife plays in the house, right? And he does constantly talk about their marriage as a partnership, right? She does this stuff, I do this stuff. Whereas Marchbanks, what sort of life does he want to give Candida? If we think of that version of the Assumption of the Virgin painting, right? What does he want to do for her?
Put her on a cloud with angels.
Yeah.
I think you can use some imagery like that, like put her on a mountain. or something.
Yeah, he talks about angels with purple wings, and now Marchbanks is supposed to be a certain kind of poet, right? Does some of this language sound a little bit reminiscent of the Wilde novel? When we talk about angels with purple wings and shit like that?
And if you want to talk about the new woman,
Mhm.
basically Morel captures more of it than anyone. Because he sees that role that she plays,
Mhm.
and then he says, well, she does this and I do
Mhm.
this. So he gives her the role of the new woman,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that he's allowing her to have not allowing her, but he realizes that she has this because she's such an important role in the household.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she mentions that at one part to Marchbanks that her husband encourages her to think for herself, and sometimes he doesn't like what she has to say, but
Uh-huh.
it's part of it.
And he is really very generous in a lot of ways as well, right? I mean, we know he's, on the one hand, taken up Eugene and tried to take care of him and, make sure that, things are going all right for him. We know the care that he takes of his parishioners, the demands they make on his time, and his willingness to speak to just about any group that wants to have him. And when he's supposed to go off and give that speech to the Guild of St. Matthew, who doesn't he bring with him? Who does he insist stays behind? Candida and Marchbanks, yeah. His wife and the interloper, his new rival. And does he even express this in terms of like, I know that I'll come out the stronger man? Right. Morel says authoritatively, right? No, you are not coming, and Eugene is not coming. You will stay here and entertain him to celebrate your return home. Eugene rises, breathless. But James, I insist. You do not want to come, and he does not want to come. Candida is about to protest. Oh, don't concern yourselves. I shall have plenty of people without you. Your chairs will be wanted by unconverted people who have never heard me before. Candida, troubled. Eugene, wouldn't you like to come? I should be afraid to let myself go before Eugene. He is so critical of sermons. Looking at him. He knows I am afraid of him. He told me as much this morning. Well, I shall show him how much I am afraid by leaving him here in your custody, Candida. Marchbanks, to himself with vivid feeling. That's brave. That's beautiful. He sits down again, listening with parted lips. Candida with anxious misgiving. But is anything the matter, James? Greatly troubled. I can't understand. Morel. Ah, I thought it was I who couldn't understand, dear. He takes her tenderly in his arms and kisses her on the forehead, then looks around quietly at Marchbanks. So he's willing to leave the house with Candida and Marchbanks there. He knows how Marchbanks feels about Candida. Candida has already said this thing to him about not wanting Eugene to learn about love from bad women. And he really rather bravely and generously leaves the two of them together.
Either way, you have to think to him, because she plays such an important role,
Mm-hmm.
if he gave her the choice to make up her own mind constantly, so she's going to do it regardless if he leaves him or not.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of wants to put Marchbanks on the spot and just kind of pressure him into making a mistake or,
Yeah, it just seemed like an alpha move to me. Like,
Yeah.
that's fine,
Mhm.
stay here with her.
But Marchbanks actually respects the move, right? His respect for Morel kind of waxes as the play goes on, right? As he sees, well, one, how cruel Candida can be to her husband, right? There are certainly places where she really kind of belittles and emasculates him. In fact, even at the end of the play, one could argue that he is diminished by her, right? That she's essentially just told this boy who comes into their house all the time how ridiculous and weak her husband is. But the crueler she is to him, the more Marchbanks admires him and feels for him, right? Marchbanks seems to feel a great deal of sympathy for the unloved, or the people he feels have been mistreated.
Is that because he's so young and like idealistic?
Well, and also, I mean, like, what's Marchbanks' relationship with his family? Does Marchbanks have anyone to love him?
He's a lot like Dorian Gray in that respect, with his, he's from nobility, but he wasn't ever treated like part of a family anywhere.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's actually, another thing to note, just as far as the class dynamics are concerned, right? We talked about domestic comedy being typically about lower or working class characters. By the 1890s, when this play is written, you almost never see lower class or working class characters on the English stage. So a lot of these same tropes are by this time transferred into upper middle class or aristocratic settings. So here we're dealing with a successful clergyman, right? So we're looking at a kind of upper middle class setting. But yeah, it's originally a lower working class milieu. Now let's try to pick apart some of these other characters we've not looked at yet. So we noted a moment ago, right, that all of the characters have names that are in some way meaningful. Right? Candida, for example, what's that name supposed to call to mind? Candid, yeah, someone who speaks her mind. James Mavor Morel.
Moral?
Exactly, yes, he is Mr. Moral. Even the secretary, Proserpine Garnet, or Prosy, there are actually a couple levels of meaning in this particular name. Who's Proserpine? Anybody know? Okay, Proserpine it's the Latin name for Persephone. Does that help at all? Some of you are nodding in recognition, others are not. Okay. Proserpine / Persephone is the Greco-Roman goddess of the underworld, right? Wife of Hades. But if we look at the first 5 letters of her name, what does it spell? First 5 letters.
Oh. Prose.
Prose. And how does her view of Candida compare to that of Morel and Marchbanks?
Well, she seems kind of like a foil for Marchbanks, who's a poet,
Uh-huh.
and her name is Prose. So she sets herself, and
Yep.
she loves
Except,
the husband, and he loves the
Mhm.
wife, and they're so opposite
Yep.
in temperament and the way they believe, but they're both
mhm.
hopelessly in love. So I guess
Yep.
that could be.
And prose is attaching itself to moral. and poetry is attaching itself to Candida, truth, right? But even like her view of Candida, right, when the others are waxing poetic about her, right? Candida here and Candida there and Candida everywhere. She licks the envelope. It's enough to drive anyone out of their senses, thumping the envelope to make it stick, to hear a perfectly commonplace woman raved about in that absurd manner, merely because she's got good hair and a tolerable figure. So, some of this could be chalked up to jealousy because she is in love with Candida's husband, right? But when we actually meet Candida, she accords much more closely to Prossy's description of her than to Morell's or Marchbanks's, right? As, basically, an attractive, normal, middle-class woman. Now, Prossy's foil in the office, right, Mr. Alexander Mill. Anybody have any particular associations with the name Mill that might have anything to do with 19th century philosophy? It's okay if you don't. I'm just asking if anybody gets the reference. I will take your silence to mean no.
John Stewart?
Yeah, John Stuart Mill. Good. And John Stuart Mill is associated with what school of philosophy? All right, we haven't got that far. Okay. John Stuart Mill is one of the foremost exponents of Victorian English utilitarianism. And a utilitarian teaches that the primary goal of human life is to be happy. Right? That is your primary purpose in life, is to make yourself happy. Sounds kind of vaguely Ayn Randian, right? So, Lexi is kind of lazy and really only wants to pursue his own pleasures, right? He doesn't want to have to get up early. He's annoyed that he has to go do Morell's rounds, right? Now, we also have the father-in-law, Burgess. And what might Burgess, if we can translate that, what might that stand for? Think in terms of social classes.
Bourgeois.
Yeah. Burgess is bourgeois. And what's this guy like? What's Burgess like? What can we tell about Burgess?
He's not really.
It certainly wasn't born bourgeois, right? His language is sort of Cockney dialect. So it's clear that he's a kind of a social climber, right? What use does he have for his son-in-law's speeches?
They help him get connected with people he can use for furthering his business interests.
Exactly, yes. He wants to use James to help himself make social connections that he can then use to further his own profits, right? In fact, when he comes in, right, he eventually admits his purpose in coming to see James, right? A clergyman is privileged to be a bit of a fool, It's only becoming in his profession that he should. Anyhow, I come here not to rake up old differences, but to let bygones be bygones. Suddenly becoming very solemn and approaching Morell. James, 3 years ago you done me a hill turn. You done me out of a contract, and when I give you harsh words and me natural disappointment, you turned me daughter against me. Well, I've come to act the part of a Christian. He can't even pronounce Christian. Offering his hand. I forgive you, James. Confound your impudence. retreating with almost lachrymose deprecation of this treatment. Is that the common language for a clergyman, James? And you so particular too? And he later on says, right, that the reason he has come to talk to James now is because James and his lot are getting influential, right? They're powerful enough that they forced Burgess to make changes in his operation and treat his workers more humanely in order to get contracts. So now he's come to try to get Morel to help him get more contracts, right? So most of these characters are pretty one-dimensional, right? All of the characters outside of the triangle are pretty one-note, right? Would we all more or less agree on this? Yeah, most of them are basically jokes. It's only Marchbanks, Morel, and Candida that have any real complexity. And when Marchbanks, we're running a little short on time, so I should probably just get to this. When Marchbanks goes off into the night by himself, right, what do you think is the secret that he's carrying with him? What do you think is the lesson that he's learned from all this? What has all of Candida's love and care done for James?
It gave him everything. It made him the man he is today. Like, he was
Yeah. It made him the man he is, right? For better or for worse. Right? Morel is dependent on Candida. Right? We're told in the very last line of the play, right? Candida and Morel embrace, but they do not know the secret in the poet's heart. Right? What is the thing that has given Eugene what strength he has?
the fact that he wasn't ever loved and that he didn't know happiness.
Yeah.
So is that the secret, that he's stronger than Morel? He is?
I think we're getting there, right? I think it has more to do with what he sees has stifled Morel. Right? Why is Morel weak? Because he's been cared for. Because he's lived in this comfortable bourgeois domestic environment.
So does he win? Does he just think he won?
That's, it's a good question. It's clear that I feel like the joke is on Candida and Morel at the end because they don't know the secret in the poet's heart, right? They don't understand fully how the codependent dynamic of their relationship has in a way limited or weakened both of them. But I think Eugene gets that. And so, out into the night with me. Right? Very few really good poets, right, live lives free of complication or tragedy. Right? It's very hard to make good art out of pure happiness.
You gotta suffer.
Yeah. And Eugene knows how to suffer. And if he forgets how to suffer, then he will never develop. He's not a great poet at this point, right? From what we can gather, the poetry he's writing is a lot of bullshit. Idealized fantasy crap. But
Less interesting than fire poker.
well, the fire poker's an interesting object there too, right? Her virile husband is away, and she's holding and staring at this phallic object while this guy is trying to read bad poetry to her, and she's ignoring him.
Talks about a flaming sword.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, he turns that kind of phallic symbol she's holding into a symbol of chastity, and it's yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we are about out of time, so we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna be talking about Heart of Darkness next time. I have some guide questions for you. All right, so let's see. What the hell happened to her? Okay. Here we go. Lights, see it? And we'll see you Wednesday. Oh, I have your in-class writings from last time.